Have you ever noticed children do not usually decide they are not intelligent? They learn it. A child does not wake up one morning, look into the mirror, and suddenly conclude, I must not be smart. Something happens, then something happens again. They are asked to read in front of the class, and the words do not come as quickly as everyone expects. They know the word when someone says it, but cannot get through it on the page. They study the spelling word at home, write it correctly that night, and misspell it again the next morning. They understand the story when someone reads it to them, but struggle when they have to read it themselves. They know what they want to say, but cannot get it onto the paper in the same clear way it exists in their mind. At first, the child may say, reading is hard for me. But after enough correction, enough comparison, enough embarrassment, that sentence can change. I'm not good at school, then I'm not smart. That change may only take a few words, but psychologically, it can redirect an entire life. Because sometimes the hardest part of dyslexia is not the word the child cannot read. It is what the child begins believing that word reveals about them. Welcome to Grow Yourself Great. Before you can change the pattern, you have to understand the psychology that built it. Today, we are talking about dyslexia, what it is not, how the DSM-5-TR clinically classifies it, why difficulties involving letters, words, reading, writing, numbers, and mathematics are organized under the diagnosis, specific learning disorder. But we are not going to stop with the diagnosis because a diagnostic manual can describe where the learning difficulty appears. It cannot fully describe what it feels like to be the child living through it. It cannot show you the child counting paragraphs, hoping the teacher does not call their name. It cannot show you the teenager pretending not to care because caring has become too painful. And it cannot show you the adult still avoiding opportunities because the classroom taught them to confuse difficulty with incapability. The school year may end, the classroom may disappear, but the meaning someone gave the struggle can keep going. Let us begin with something that confuses a lot of people. You can search through the DSM-5-TR and you will not find dyslexia listed as its own separate diagnostic disorder. That does not mean dyslexia is missing. The formal diagnosis is called specific learning disorder. Specific learning disorder is classified as a neurodevelopmental disorder. In everyday language, that means the difficulty begins during development. As the brain is learning to acquire, organize, and use particular academic skills. The DSM-5-TR then asks, where is the learning difficulty showing up? There are three primary specifiers: with impairment in reading, with impairment in writing expression, and with impairment in mathematics. When people use the word dyslexia, they are generally talking about the reading presentation. That may include difficulty with accurate or fluent word recognition, decoding, and spelling. So yes, it is clinically appropriate to call this conversation Dyslexia Explained. But here is the distinction to remember. Dyslexia is the widely recognized term. Specific learning disorder with impairment in reading is the formal DSM-5-TR classification. The diagnosis names the struggle. The specifier tells you where the struggle lives. A person may have an impairment in reading. Another person may have an impairment in writing expression. Another may have an impairment in mathematics. And some people may experience difficulties across more than one area. That matters because not every learning difficulty is the same. And when we treat every struggle as though it is identical, we often that never reaches the actual problem. When the DSM-5-TR identifies an impairment in reading, it points to several possible areas: word reading accuracy, word rate fluency. Let us make that human. Word reading accuracy is about whether the person can correctly recognize and read the words on the page. A child may misread words, leave out parts of words, substitute one word for another, or need to slowly sound out words that classmates may recognize almost immediately. Reading rate or fluency is about how smoothly, accurately, and efficiently someone reads. A child may eventually reach the correct word, but if every word requires deliberate effort, reading can become exhausting. And here is the part people sometimes miss. When most of your mental energy is being used to identify the words, less energy may remain to understand, remember, and correct what those words mean. The child may not be struggling because the idea is beyond them. They may be struggling because so much effort is being spent just getting through the doorway. Reading comprehension refers to understanding what has been read, but we have to be careful about how we interpret difficulty here. A child may have strong listening comprehension. They may understand complex ideas, ask thoughtful questions, participate intelligently in conversation, then appear not to understand the same information when they have to read it independently. The intelligence did not disappear when the book opened. The pathway into the information became more demanding. That is a major difference. Because when we confuse difficulty accessing information with difficulty understanding information, we may underestimate the child. The book may be difficult to enter. That does not mean there is nothing inside the child capable of understanding it. Specific learning disorder can also involve impairment in written expression. That can include difficulty with spelling accuracy, grammar, punctuation, sentence construction, and the clarity or organization of written ideas. Imagine having a complete thought inside your mind. You understand it. You can explain it verbally. You may even explain it with depth, creativity, and insight. But when you try to write it, something changes. The sentence becomes shorter. The ideas lose their order. The spelling interrupts your concentration. You spend so much energy trying to make the writing correct that the richness of the original thought never reaches the page. Then someone grades the page as though the page contains the full measure of your thinking. It does not. It contains what you were able to translate through a skill that may be difficult for you. The page may reveal the writing challenge. It may not reveal the full capacity of the mind trying to write. A child can know more than the page is able to show. But after enough disappointing grades, that distinction may begin disappearing. I know more than I can write can slowly become, maybe I don't know very much at all. The child does not only receive a grade, the child may begin constructing an explanation of themselves. That is how an academic difficulty can reach into identity. Not because the child lacks ideas, because the visible product is being treated as the complete measure of the person. Specific learning disorder can also involve impairment in mathematics. People sometimes use the word dyscalculia to describe a significant pattern of difficulty involving numbers and mathematics. The DSM-5-TR identifies possible problems with number sense, memorizing arithmetic facts, accurate or fluent calculation, and mathematical reasoning. Number sense involves understanding quantities, relationships between numbers, and what numbers represent. A child may struggle to quickly recognize which number is larger. They may lose track while counting, have difficulty estimating, or repeatedly forget arithmetic facts, even after considerable practice. They may understand the concept while someone is explaining it, then struggle to retrieve it later. They may reverse operations, lose their place inside a multi-step problem, understand the answer when someone walks them through it, but struggle to independently organize the steps. And then the visible behavior gets interpreted. They were not listening. They did not study. They are careless. They should know this by now. Maybe, but not necessarily. There is a difference between refusing to use a skill and having difficulty developing automatic access to that skill. There is a difference between not caring and caring while repeatedly failing to produce the expected result. When we fail to recognize that difference, we do not only misunderstand the academic problem, we may misjudge the person experiencing it. Now, having difficulty in school does not automatically mean someone has specific learning disorder. One bad grade is not a diagnosis. One frustrating subject is not a diagnosis. One difficult semester is not a diagnosis. The pattern has to be more persistent, more substantial, and more disruptive than that. The first part of the criteria involves persistent difficulty learning and using academic skills. That difficulty may show up as inaccurate, slow, or effortful word reading, difficulty understanding what is read, problems with spelling, difficulty with written expression, difficulty mastering number sense, number facts, or calculation, or difficulty with mathematical reasoning. And these difficulties must continue for at least 6 months, even though the person has received help, specifically targeting the problem. That last part matters because sometimes a child is called incapable when what they actually received was instruction that did not fit how they needed to learn. A diagnosis should not begin with the assumption that the child cannot learn. It should begin by asking what has been taught, how it was taught, what support was provided, and what happened when that support was used. The second part of the criteria is that the affected academic skills are substantially below what would generally be expected for the person's age, and the difficulty has to meaningfully interfere with school, work, or everyday life. That determination should not come from one teacher's impression, one test, or one painful moment. It should come from a comprehensive assessment that may include developmental history, educational history, school records, professional observations, and individually administered standardized achievement measures. The third part tells us that the difficulty begins during the school age years. But here is something that surprises people. The difficulty may not become fully visible until the demands become greater than the person's ability to compensate. Someone may manage when the reading is short, when support is available, when the material is familiar, when they can rely on memory, context, or help from someone else. Then the work becomes longer, faster, more complex, and the strategies that once helped them survive are no longer enough. That is why some people are not identified until adolescence, college, professional training, or adulthood. The difficulty was not necessarily new. The demand finally became strong enough to expose what compensation had been hiding. The fourth part requires clinicians to consider other explanations. The difficulty cannot be better explained by intellectual disability, uncorrected problems with vision or hearing, another neurological or mental disorder, severe psychosocial adversity, lack of proficiency in the language of instruction, or inadequate educational instruction. That does not mean a person cannot experience more than one condition. Dyslexia may exist alongside ADHD, anxiety, depression, language disorders, or other developmental differences. The point is not to eliminate complexity. The point is to understand the source of the difficulty accurately enough that the support actually matches it. The DSM-5-TR also asks clinicians to describe severity: mild, moderate, or severe. Mild does not mean meaningless. It means the person may experience difficulty in one or two academic areas, but function effectively with appropriate support, intervention, or accommodations. Moderate means the difficulties are more marked. The person may require specialized instruction and meaningful accommodations to develop proficiency and complete tasks effectively. Severe means the difficulties are significant and may exist across multiple academic skills. The person may require ongoing, individualized, and intensive support. Severity is not a ranking of intelligence. It is not a scale of human worth. It describes the level of support the learning difficulty may require. A diagnosis should not become a ceiling placed over someone's life. It should become a clearer map for how to help them move through it. One of the most common beliefs about dyslexia is that people simply see letters or words backward. Some children with dyslexia may reverse letters, but young children without dyslexia may also reverse letters while learning. Letter reversal by itself does not define dyslexia. Dyslexia more commonly involves difficulty connecting written symbols with the sound structure of language. It may involve difficulty recognizing words accurately and automatically, decoding unfamiliar words, reading fluently, and spelling. Let us slow that down. Spoken language is made of sounds. Written language uses symbols to represent those sounds. A developing reader has to learn that words can be broken into smaller sound units. Then they have to learn that letters or combinations of letters represent those sounds. Then the brain has to connect the printed form, the spoken form, and the meaning quickly enough that reading becomes increasingly automatic. That is a remarkable achievement. Most fluent adult readers have done it for so long, they no longer notice everything their brain is doing. They look at a word and meaning appears. But for a child with dyslexia, that connection may develop less efficiently. The child may have to work deliberately through a process that appears automatic for classmates. The struggle is not always that the child does not know. Sometimes the struggle is that access to what they know is slower, less automatic, and more demanding. That does not mean the brain is empty. It means reading may require more explicit instruction, more repetition, more time, and more effort. Here is another important truth. Human beings are biologically prepared for spoken language. Children typically develop speech through exposure, interaction, and development. Reading is different. Reading is a cultural invention. The brain has to build a reading network by connecting systems that were already doing other things: visual recognition, speech sounds, language, attention, memory, meaning. There is no single switch inside a child that simply turns reading on. Reading has to be taught, practiced, integrated, and gradually made more automatic. So when a child struggles to read, the first question should not always be, what is wrong with this child? A better question may be, where is this complex process breaking down? Can they hear and manipulate the sounds inside words? Can they connect sounds with letters? Can they decode unfamiliar words? Can they quickly retrieve familiar words? Are they reading accurately but slowly? Can they understand the material? When someone reads it aloud, What instruction have they received? Was it explicit? Was it systematic? Was it consistent? Did the instruction reach the specific area of difficulty? Because cannot read well is not a complex explanation. It is an outcome. And outcomes do not always tell you what process created it. This needs to be said plainly. Dyslexia is not an intellectual disability. A person with dyslexia may have average, above average, or exceptional intellectual ability. They may be imaginative, analytical, verbally gifted, mechanically skilled, emotionally perceptive, artistically talented, strategic, creative, innovative, or capable in ways a standard reading assignment never reveals. But school depends heavily on reading and writing. That means one specific difficulty can influence performance across multiple subjects. A child may understand science, but struggle to read the chapter, understand history, but need more time to complete the essay, know the mathematical concept, but misread the word problem, have an excellent idea, but lose points because of spelling. The difficulty spreads across the school day, not because the child lacks the capacity to understand every subject, but because reading and writing are often the primary doors through which the child must demonstrate understanding. And here is the mistake. School may be measuring how efficiently the child can access one particular academic skill, while everyone quietly behaves as though it is measuring the full capacity of the child's mind. Those are not the same thing. When one door is difficult, people may conclude there is nothing valuable inside the building, but the doorway was never the whole building. Now, I want you to imagine being the child, not observing the child. Be the child. You are sitting in class, and the teacher announces that everyone will take turns reading. You immediately start counting. You count the students ahead of you. You try to calculate which paragraph will be yours while everyone else is listening to the story. You are practicing your paragraph silently. You are not following the lesson anymore. You are preparing to survive your turn. Then another child reads more than you expected. Now your paragraph changes. Your heart begins beating faster. The words look harder. The room feels smaller. The name is called. You begin. You misread the first word. Someone corrects you. You start again. You know people are waiting. You can hear the silence. You begin guessing because guessing feels faster than decoding. The teacher says, sound it out. You try. But now everyone is watching you try. Eventually, the moment ends. The class moves forward, but you do not. You are still sitting inside what just happened. You are wondering who noticed, who laughed, what the teacher thinks, whether this will happen again tomorrow. That experience is not included in the reading score, but psychologically it matters because human beings do not only remember events, we form expectations from them. After enough painful experiences, the child may no longer approach reading as a learning task. Their nervous system may begin approaching it as a social threat. Now, reading aloud does not only mean decoding words, it means risking exposure, embarrassment, comparison, judgment, and shame. The child may not only fear getting the word wrong, they may fear what everyone will decide the wrong word means about them. Children adapt. They always do. But adaptation does not always look healthy from the outside. One child becomes quiet. They stop raising their hand, avoid eye contact. When volunteers are requested, sit in the back, make themselves smaller, hoping not to be selected. Another child becomes disruptive. They joke, talk, argue, refuse, get sent out of class. Adults may conclude this child does not care about learning. But consider another possibility. Maybe being removed from the classroom feels less painful than being exposed inside it. Maybe the behavior does not prove the child does not care. Maybe the child cares so much that failure has become emotionally unbearable. Another child becomes a perfectionist. They spend excessive time on assignments, erase repeatedly, avoid turning in work, become overwhelmed by small mistakes. They are not only trying to do well, they are trying to prevent anyone from discovering what they fear is wrong with. Another child becomes dependent. They ask a parent to check every sentence, need constant reassurance, avoid beginning work alone, not because they are incapable of thinking, because repeated correction has weakened their trust in their own responses. Another child becomes the entertainer. They learn to make everyone laugh before anyone can laugh at them. Humor becomes protection. Personality becomes camouflage. People see the class clown. They do not see the child terrified of being asked to read. That is why behavior requires interpretation. What looks like laziness may be discouragement. What looks like defiance may be protection. What looks like indifference may be shame. What looks like carelessness may be cognitive overload. And what looks like a lack of ability may be a child trying to perform while managing a level of fear. No one has recognized sometimes the behavior is not the problem. Sometimes the behavior is the child's attempt to solve a problem they do not know how to explain. Dyslexia can make reading difficult, but difficulty alone does not determine identity. Meaning does. Two children can experience a similar reading struggle and construct very different beliefs from it. One child learns reading is difficult for me, so I need a different kind of instruction. Another learns reading is difficult for me because I am stupid. Those beliefs do not create the same future. The first identifies a challenge. The second defines the person. The first leaves room for strategy. The second creates shame. The first says, this is something I experience. The second says, this is who I am. And once the child begins believing this is who I am, the belief rarely stays inside the mind. It begins shaping language, then behavior. The child thinks, I embarrass myself whenever I read. Then begins saying, I hate reading. Then does everything possible to avoid reading. The avoidance reduces embarrassment for the moment, but it may also reduce practice, support, and opportunities for corrective experiences. Now the behavior appears to confirm the original thought. I knew I could not do it. That is how a belief can begin, building evidence for itself. Not because the belief was completely true, but because behavior started organizing life around it. The child was not only learning how to read, the child was learning what reading difficulty supposedly said about who they were. This is where one of the Grow Yourself Great frameworks becomes important. Think it, speak it, do it. This does not mean every thought magically becomes reality. It means repeated thinking can shape the language we use about ourselves, and repeated language can influence the actions we become willing or unwilling to take. A child thinks I am slower than everyone else. The child speaks, I cannot read, then does everything possible to avoid situations that may require reading. An adolescent thinks, I am not academic. The adolescent speaks, school is not for me, then does the minimum required or leaves opportunities unexplored. An adult thinks, I am not good with words. The adult speaks, I could never handle that position. then does not submit the application. A reading difference influenced a thought. A thought became a statement. The statement became a behavioral limit, and the behavioral limit changed the trajectory. That is why language matters, especially the language a child repeatedly hears from adults. You are lazy. You are careless. You are not applying yourself. You know better. You are not trying. A child may eventually begin supplying those statements without the adult being present. That is how external voices can become internal dialogue. But think it, speak it, do it also gives us a pathway toward adaptation, not empty positive thinking, not pretending. The struggle does not exist. Accurate thinking. I learn differently. This may take me longer. But longer does not mean impossible. I may need support, and needing support does not mean inferior. Then accurate speech. I have difficulty with reading, but I understand the material. I need the instructions explained verbally. I use assistive technology because it gives me access. I need additional time to demonstrate what I know. Then deliberate action. Requesting the accommodation, choosing the audiobook, entering the training program, applying for the promotion, returning to school, reading at a pace that supports comprehension, accepting assistance without converting assistance into shame. The goal is not to deny the difficulty. The goal is to stop allowing the difficulty to author an inaccurate identity. That is not avoiding reality. That is responding to reality with greater accuracy. By adolescence, the academic demands increase. The reading becomes longer. The vocabulary becomes more complex. Students are expected to read independently, take notes, organize assignments, write essays, and complete work within limited time. A teenager with dyslexia may have spent years compensating. They may memorize use context to guess words, listen closely in class so they do not have to rely as heavily on the textbook. Choose easier words when writing, even though they understand more sophisticated ideas. Avoid classes with heavy reading demands. Copy from the board without fully processing the material. Depend on friends to explain instructions, or procrastinate because beginning the assignment activates years of frustration. Adults may see inconsistent performance. The student explains the topic intelligently, but performs poorly on the written test. They contribute to the discussion, but fail to complete the reading. They appear capable one day and overwhelmed the next. The inconsistency can confuse people. If you can do this, why can you not do that? Because human performance is not determined by intelligence alone. It is influenced by the specific demand, the method of presentation, time pressure, fatigue, support, anxiety, and how much cognitive effort the task requires. The question should not always be, why can you do one thing but not the other? Sometimes the better question is, what is different about the demand? A student may be fully capable of understanding the concept while struggling with the format through which understanding must be demonstrated. Dyslexia is classified as an academic learning disorder, but living with it can create emotional consequences. Not every child with dyslexia develops anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, or behavioral difficulties. We should never make that assumption. But repeated struggle, public embarrassment, comparison, criticism, and misunderstanding can affect emotional development. A child may become anxious before tests, ashamed when reading aloud, frustrated when effort does not produce the expected result, angry when adults misunderstand, jealous of siblings who complete homework quickly, exhausted from spending hours on work classmates finish, much sooner. They may become highly sensitive to correction because correction is no longer experienced as information. It is experienced as confirmation. Here we go again. I got it wrong. They see it. I know I am not smart. That is why helping a child with dyslexia requires more than teaching academic skill. We also have to help the child interpret the difficulty accurately. The child needs to hear, this is difficult and you are capable. You made an error and the error does not define you. You need a different pathway, not a smaller future. We are going to work on the skill without putting your worth on trial, because the goal is not only to help the child read, the goal is also to prevent the child from reading their difficulty as a verdict against themselves. Dyslexia does not automatically disappear when someone becomes an adult. People can improve significantly. They can develop strong reading skills, effective strategies, and successful careers. But some adults continue experiencing difficulty with reading speed, spelling, written organization, note-taking, forms, multi-step written instructions, or tasks requiring rapid processing or written language. An adult may read the same email several times, spend longer preparing reports, avoid reading aloud during meetings, ask someone else to review important writing, feel embarrassed when spelling a familiar word incorrectly, lose their place inside dense documents, understand information better when hearing it than when reading it, need additional time to organize written thoughts, or feel mentally exhausted after extended reading. But the visible difficulty may not be the only thing carried into adulthood. The psychological history may still be present. An adult may avoid a promotion because the new promotion includes paperwork, decline leadership because they fear being exposed during presentations, avoid college, licensure, or certification because they remember what school felt like. Allow a spouse or coworker to handle written communication. Stay in positions beneath their ability because they have confused reading speed with professional capacity. Some adults become extraordinarily prepared. They rehearse everything, check every word, arrive early, work longer, hide the effort. People call them high functioning without realizing how much energy goes into appearing unaffected. Others build successful careers around their strengths. They become entrepreneurs, artists, clinicians, leaders, builders, designers, engineers, performers, strategists, tradespeople. They build lives that clearly demonstrate ability. But even a successful adult may still carry an old sentence. I am not really smart. Think about that. A person can spend an entire life producing evidence of their ability and still feel governed by one conclusion formed in the classroom decades earlier. That is not because the child was weak. It is because identity can continue repeating old conclusions long after the original environment has changed. Some people reach adulthood without ever being identified. They may have been called lazy, unmotivated, careless, disorganized, or an underachiever. They may have survived school through intelligence, memory, support from others, or extraordinary effort. Maybe they avoided the subjects that exposed the difficulty. Maybe the school lacked resources. Maybe adults did not recognize the signs. Maybe the person's strengths concealed the struggle. Then adulthood creates a new demand: college level reading, a professional examination, complex documentation, a job requiring rapid written communication, helping their own child with schoolwork. And suddenly the old difficulty becomes visible again. Receiving an explanation later in life can produce mixed emotions, relief. So I was not imagining it, grief. What could have been different? If someone had understood anger, why did everyone assume I was not trying? And sometimes compassion, that child was working much harder than anyone knew. A diagnosis cannot rewrite childhood, but understanding can change the meaning assigned to childhood. The adult can revisit the story, not to become trapped in the past, but to correct the conclusion. I was not stupid. I was not lazy. I was experiencing a learning difficulty that no one had accurately identified. That understanding does not remove every challenge, but it can begin separating identity from years of misinterpretation. The diagnosis may arrive late, but accuracy can still arrive in time to change the future. Dyslexia is developmental. It has biological and neurological foundations, and it often runs in families. It is not caused by laziness. It is not caused by poor character. It is not caused by a child refusing to focus. And it is not created because the parent failed to read enough books at home. The way dyslexia presents can be influenced by many factors: language, quality of instruction, early identification, access to intervention, coexisting conditions, and the demands placed on the person. But we should never turn a neurodevelopmental learning difference into a moral accusation against the child or the family. The child did not choose the difficulty. The child is responding to the difficulty. Our responsibility is to accurately identify what is happening, provide effective instruction, reduce unnecessary shame, and help the child develop both skills and self-understanding. Because when adults misread the difficulty, the child may spend years trying to defend themselves against an accusation that was never accurate. A proper evaluation is not simply someone asking, "Do you mix up letters?" It gathers information from multiple areas: developmental history, family history, educational opportunity, previous interventions, reading accuracy, reading fluency, decoding, spelling, written expression, mathematics, when relevant, listening, comprehension, language abilities, and other cognitive, emotional, or developmental factors that may influence performance. The goal is not only to determine whether someone meets diagnostic criteria. The goal is to understand the person's pattern or strengths and needs. What can they do well? Where does the process break down? What instruction has already been attempted? What accommodations will provide fair access? What intervention should be targeted? What emotional consequences have developed around the difficulty? A useful assessment should produce more than a name. It should produce a direction. Because telling someone you have dyslexia without explaining what that means for their learning can leave them with another label, but no pathway. A label may explain what the pattern is called. A good assessment explains what to do next. Dyslexia is not treated by asking a child to try harder at the same strategy that is not working. Effort matters, but effort without effective instruction can become repeated failure. And repeated failure can teach a capable child to stop trusting their own effort. Students with dyslexia often benefit from structured literacy instruction. That means reading is taught explicitly, systematically, cumulatively, and directly. The child is not expected to somehow discover the reading system through exposure alone. The relationships between sounds and letters are taught clearly. Patterns are introduced in an organized sequence. Previously learned skills are reviewed and connected to new ones. The child practices decoding, spelling, word recognition, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, with instruction matched to their needs. Early intervention matters, not because older children or adults cannot learn. They can. But every year a child struggles without effective support can add academic gap, avoidance, frustration, and harmful beliefs about the self. The longer the child goes without an accurate explanation, the greater the risk that the child will invent one. And children do not always invent gentle explanations. They may conclude, "This is who I am." We want to intervene before difficulty becomes identity. Additional time is not cheating. Audio books are not cheating. Text to speech is not cheating. Speech to text is not cheating. Having instructions read aloud is not cheating. Using spell check is not cheating. Receiving notes in advance is not cheating. These tools do not give someone intelligence they do not possess. They reduce a barrier to the person, can access information, organize a response, or demonstrate what they know. Eyeglasses do not create intelligence. They create access to what the person is trying to see. Accommodations work from a similar principle. The goal is not to force everyone to access information through the same pathway. The goal is to understand whether the person can learn, comprehend, and use the information. Accommodations do not replace instruction. A child still needs to develop reading and writing skills, but support and skill building can happen at the same time. We can strengthen the difficult pathway while still giving the child access to learning now. A child should not have to wait until reading becomes effortless before being allowed to encounter complex ideas. Access should not be the reward for overcoming the barrier. Access is part of how the child gets the opportunity to keep developing. The first thing is to believe the pattern you are seeing. Do not wait until the child completely loses confidence. If the child persistently struggles with reading, spelling, writing, or mathematics, despite instruction and effort, seek evaluation. Ask specific questions. Do not settle for "they are a little behind." Behind in what? Word recognition, phonological awareness, decoding, fluency, comprehension, spelling, written organization, number sense, calculation, mathematical reasoning, clear questions. Clear questions produce clearer interventions. The second thing is to watch the language used around the child. Do not use character words to describe skill difficulties. Lazy, careless, unmotivated, not trying, those words do more than describe. They interpret. And the interpretation may be wrong. Describe the behavior instead. You completed 3 problems and stopped. You are reading the word slowly. You are having difficulty organizing this paragraph. Now we can investigate what happened without turning the behavior into identity. Third, do not make every interaction about remediation. A child needs places where they experience competence. They need to laugh, create, build, move, lead, help, imagine, solve, connect, and belong. Support the learning difficulty without making the difficulty the center of the child's identity. Fourth, talk openly and accurately about dyslexia. A child should not have to invent their own explanation. You can say, "Your brain is capable of learning. Reading develops differently for you. So we are going to give you instructions and tools that match what you need." That statement acknowledges the challenge without shrinking the future. The child needs truth, not pity, not pressure, not false reassurance. Truth. This is difficult. We understand why, and we are going to help you move through it. For adults, the first step may be recognizing how much of life has been organized, around avoidance? What opportunities have you dismissed before learning what support was available? What do you routinely ask someone else to do? Not because you cannot learn it, but because the task activates old shame. Where are you still saying, I am not smart, when the more accurate statement is, this specific task is difficult for me? Listen to the thoughts. Not every thought deserves agreement. Listen to the language. Not every sentence you learned in childhood deserves to become a permanent identity. Then examine the behavior. What have you stopped yourself from doing because the child inside you still expects to be embarrassed? You may need formal assessment, accommodations in education, or qualifying professional settings. Assistive technology, a different workflow, more preparation time, a writing support tool, audiobooks, speech to text, or direct instruction in skills that were never effectively taught. Using support does not invalidate competence. Competence also includes knowing how you function and intentionally creating conditions that help you function well. You are not less capable because you know what helps your capability. Become visible. Dyslexia reveals how easily human beings confuse performance with capacity. A child performs poorly on a reading task, and people assume the child lacks intelligence. But performance is always produced through an interaction. The person, the skill, the environment, the instruction, the time available, the support provided, the emotional state, and the method used to demonstrate knowledge. Change one of those variables, and a different ability may become visible. Dyslexia reveals that struggle can become identity when no one helps a person interpret the struggle accurately. It reveals that children are always constructing meaning, even when adults believe they are only teaching a lesson. It reveals that shame can change behavior without changing ability. A child can become quiet, avoidant, angry, funny, perfectionistic, or dependent, while the underlying intelligence remains present. It reveals that people can spend years compensating for a difficulty while believing the compensation proves they are fraudulent. And it reveals that sometimes the most important thing an adult can give a child is an accurate explanation, not an excuse. Because when the pattern is understood accurately, the response can become more effective. The problem was never only that the child struggled. The deeper danger was that everyone, including the child, might misunderstand what the struggle meant. Maybe you grew up with dyslexia. Maybe you were never diagnosed. Maybe school made you question yourself. Maybe you learned to hide. Maybe you became excellent at pretending. You understood the instructions. Maybe you avoided reading aloud. Maybe you stopped dreaming beyond what felt safe. Maybe you built a successful life and still feel nervous when someone hands you a document. There may be a sentence you needed to hear that no one knew to say. So let me say it now. You were not stupid. The task was difficult. The pathway was different. The support may have been insufficient. The adults may have misunderstood. You may have adapted in ways that protected you then, but restrict you now. And none of that means your future must remain governed by what happened in that classroom. You can understand the pattern now. You can speak about yourself more accurately now. You can use support without apologizing now. You can attempt what you once avoided now. Think it. I am more than the academic skill that challenged me. Speak it. I can acknowledge the difficulty without converting it into inferiority. Do it. Ask for the help. Use the tool. Take the class. Complete the application. Read at your pace. Write with support. Allow yourself to become visible without waiting until every difficulty disappears. The child may have learned, I cannot, but the adult can finally ask, was that true or was that the only explanation I had? Dyslexia is not listed as a separate diagnostic title in the DSM-5-TR. It is recognized within specific learning disorder, more directly through the specifier with impairment in reading. Specific learning disorder can also include impairment in writing, impairment in written expression, and impairment in mathematics. The diagnosis requires persistent academic difficulties that continue despite targeted support. For substantially below what is expected for age, interfere with school, work, or daily life, begin during the school age years, and are not better explained by another condition or inadequate instruction. But criteria alone do not capture the whole human experience. They do not capture the child counting paragraphs, hoping the teacher does not call their name. They do not capture the adolescent making jokes to conceal embarrassment. They do not capture the adult declining a promotion because paperwork still feels like exposure. They do not capture the hours of effort hidden inside one completed page. And they do not capture the identity someone may construct when a learning difference is repeatedly mistaken for a lack of intelligence. That is why clinical accuracy matters. It helps us name the difficulty. Effective intervention matters. It helps develop the skill. Accommodations matter. They create access. But how we interpret the person matters too, because a child is always listening, not only to what we say about the assignment, but to what our response teaches them to believe about themselves. A child can think, I learn differently, speak, I need a different pathway, and do what helps them keep learning. Or the child can think, I am stupid, speak, I cannot do this, and spend years avoiding evidence that might have proven otherwise. The difference is not created through slogans. It is created through accurate understanding, effective support, repeated experiences of capability and language that tells the truth. Difficulty is real, but difficulty is not identity. Support may be necessary, but support is not inferiority. Reading matters. Writing matters. Mathematics matters. But no single academic skill has ever contained the full measure of a human mind. The word may have been difficult to decode, but the most important thing to correct may be the meaning the person learned to attach to it. If this helped you understand dyslexia beyond letters, words, and school performance, subscribe to Grow Yourself Great, because here we do not stop at describing what people do. We explore the psychology shaping what they believe, how they adapt, and who they become. Understanding your psychology matters. It helps you understand the patterns shaping your life. Understand clearly. Integrate deeply. Grow yourself great.